Hello everybody, welcome to this supply management webinar in partnership with GEP. My name is Jennifer Jackson and I'm the contributing editor of Supply Management Insider, and I'll be hosting the discussion today. So over the next hour, we're going to be talking about how supply chain scope 3 emissions, how procurement can collect data, track emissions and set the right targets. Well, sharing their views and advice with us today is our expert panel, which I'm very pleased to introduce to you. We have Gladys Araujo, Vice President of Global Quality Systems at Mattel. Gladys, could you just briefly tell us a bit about you and your role, please?
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer, for the introduction, and thank you very much to GEP for the invitation. It is an honor for me to be here today sharing with this great audience. I currently the Global Quality Vice President for Mattel, but I have over 25 years of working experience in global supply chain in 4 continents and leading multicultural teams, including procurement and also supplier development. And today in this panel, my contribution will be more from the execution perspective, and I'm very happy to be here and share best practices.
Great. Thank you very much, Gladys. And we also have Maria Hunziker, who is the Group Head of Sustainable Procurement and Impact Valuation at Holcim. Maria, please could you tell us a bit about you and your role?
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Yes, I'm responsible for the group for sustainable procurement, deploying programs on Scope 3 and the due diligence in the supply chain. I am sitting in the group sustainability, reporting to our Chief Sustainability Officer, but I work with our CPO, our Chief Procurement Officer. So my role is like I am in the middle to mobilize the company from pledge to action.
Lovely. Thank you, Maria. And we have Yile Laux, Vice President of Global Delivery from GEP. Yile, please tell us a bit about your role.
Thank you, Jennifer, and also a very warm welcome to everybody, and thanks for having me. I lead our global ESG offering at GEP, and we help our clients across all dimensions of ESG, whether it's environmental, social, and governance, with a specific focus on procurement and supply chain. And we do this through delivering services and our proprietary software.
Thank you, Yile. Well, welcome again, everybody. I'm sure our audience can't wait to hear from you and learn some tips on how their organisations can manage Scope 3 emissions efficiently. Just a note to you, our audience, if you're joining us live, you can submit questions and comments for our panel at any point during the webinar, and we're going to try and pick as many as we can of your questions as time allows at the end of the session. And we also have a poll question for you. You should see it below the video now if you have a look below video. Do you think your company is making good progress towards its Scope 3 emissions goals? So you can choose from yes, no, or don't know. We just want to know what you think, basically. And then we'll ask our panel what you think about that. And feel free to comment your answer in the comment box too. We will review the responses very shortly. So on to our main discussion. To kick us off, I'd like to ask our panel to share any key successes or challenges that your organisation has faced so far in its sustainability journey to reduce Scope 3 emissions. Yile, can I start with you, please?
Yes, of course. And I mean, one thing that is great to see now is that sustainability is more important than ever. And with increasing pressure from all angles, whether it's governments, consumers, investors, and employees. But it also brings new challenges for businesses, and in particular for procurement. I see this as a reinvention of procurement, because the procurement and supply chain teams, they now suddenly have additional expectation challenges, right? Procurement needs to actively contribute to deliver environmental, social, and governance objectives. And procurement is really expected to look beyond, tier 1 suppliers. And in some cases, procurement had to, but now it's even more present than before. A big second challenge that we see is that the complexity of the role within procurement as a result of these changes is becoming increasingly, more complex, and procurement leaders have to take a much longer term approach in, how they source materials. A good example is, for instance, sourcing green steel. There's very little, green steel available, and only, getting on board right now is so important for green steel that will be produced in a number of years to come. And if you're missing out, then you might risk to not hit your targets, but also perhaps, pay a lot more for these low carbon alternatives. At the same time, there's also potential conflicting objectives, between sometimes price, between quality, between sustainability, and how do you now navigate, these areas, and how do you make sure that, your procurement teams is mastering, sustainability skills, because it's a very broad area, and procurement as a result really needs to step up and master all these new skills. And then finally, there's the data and technology challenge, in our point of view, with a lack of kind of visibility, where often the data is not, being collected or is not easily accessible. Also think about data reliability, where most information is either found indirectly or self-reported by suppliers. The frequency by which data, especially when it comes to scope 3, is reported. It's on an annual basis, it's in the rear view mirror, but you need something, of course, that also provides perspective going forward. And of course, the scale. We're dealing with 50, 100,000 suppliers. So how do you make most sense out of that? So these are the key challenges, I would say. So it's increased expectations, role complexity, but also the data and technology challenges. But then also on the success side, I mean, we've seen and we've helped, several companies, but in particular also one, financial services company to really develop scope 3 reporting. And the emphasis here is on recurring, data, recurring information, using, input and output models, and enriching that supplier data, with whether suppliers have a sustainability report, whether they're disclosing to CDP what their scores are, whether they've set science-based targets. And this really provided the basis to start implement emission reduction initiatives, and actively steering the supply base to take action. So that would be, in summary, the challenges and successes that I've seen so far.
Great, thank you very much for that, Yile. Very interesting to see your perspectives there. Maria, I wonder if you've got any challenges and successes that you could share with us from Holcim.
Yes, I would summarize the challenge is the magnitude and the need to scale up any good idea, any super innovation, any technology. This is the main challenge. And I would like to illustrate, for example, in our scope 3, 75% of our emissions are in 3 categories. For example, fuels. We are in the cement sector. The production process is an energy intensive process, and we are deploying we have a super company, I'm very proud, GeoCycle. What we do, we co-process waste, and we are replacing and phasing out fossil fuels with energy from waste. And as I say, the magnitude of the fuel we need, the access to the biomass or the access to municipal waste or industrial waste to co-process and replace these traditional fuels is the challenge. We are working, we are having presence in local markets. But again, the magnitude to make this impact. And the other example I can illustrate is the transportation, the other top 3 categories in our scope 3. So we deal, as you know, we transport our cement to customers. The majority of our transportations goes in heavy duty vehicles, and majority are diesel. And here we are talking about 300,000 trucks around the world. We drive 2 billion kilometers per year, and we are not a transportation company. So the challenge is the magnitude, access to technologies, scale up this, and on top of this, 95% of our fleet is owned and operated by third parties. So the challenge is to engage and mobilize our suppliers on this decarbonization journey in the scale that is needed to reduce and to to deliver on our targets. We have a reduction targets validated by SBTi. So we are mobilizing, doing our roadmaps per countries to try to action all the levers that will help us to deliver on our reduction. So the challenge is the magnitude.
Amazing. Thank you, Maria. Gladys, any challenges and successes you'd like to share with us from your perspective in your company?
Yes, thank you, Jennifer. I do echo 100% the comments of my peers about the challenges in terms of the magnitude. I would like to offer a slightly different perspective, and I see in the successes, if not managed properly, it could be also the challenge as well. And talking about the foundation, if we are really starting this project as a scope 3, or we are having some bottlenecks, I see three main areas that we should really pay strong attention. One is internally. Of course, we need 100% top management commitment. We need to have a proper deployment on the awareness of why we need to do this in the whole organization. It's not only a sustainability job or only a procurement job. It's everyone needs to involve, and why is this important, not only for the business, it's also for the planet. Provide training as necessary to all the organization to really have aha moments on how they can contribute in the different areas. And of course, very important is to link it to performance indicators and your annual bonuses as well. That way it can be seen as an important topic on the business strategy. And of course, this define as much as necessary internal task forces in which we have multidisciplinary people really working towards the same objective. And then everyone needs to be having that in mind. And talking about the second point externally is more or less the same, meaning when we are talking about engaging our suppliers for proper measurement of the scope 3, is of course, again, the awareness, the business commitment, the importance of the collaboration, training if we are using any specific tools that we need them to be using, support along the way, and especially make sure that we have contracts in place that are addressing these key performance indicators in terms of what needs to be done and specifically by when. If possible, define some incentives. You better understand your own business and your own set of suppliers and what will be appreciated from them. And of course, in both cases, keeping track of the progress and monitoring. One additional point will be that it's also very important to do a proper classification of your suppliers in terms maybe in volume and also the high impact of the scopes. And also another suggestion is reduce the suppliers in the network, because the bigger the supplier, we are talking about footprint, we're talking about magnitude, then I know that if we can minimize the, let's say, the number of movements, the number of key players, also the volume will be increased for some of them, and that's a significant incentive, especially looking in the vendors that are totally 100% engaged with these global goals. That's it from my end.
Thank you, Gladys. Some good best practice tips there from you. And looking at a point we've touched on in the conversation so far, technology. So in what way can technology help organizations reduce scope 3 emissions? And how can organizations make best use of this technology to support the journey to net zero? I'd like to come to you there first, Yile, if I may.
Yes, of course. I guess we can distinguish technology in two ways, right? One is technologies that are required for the energy transition, which I won't be focusing on, even though, I mean, it's good to say that, you know, from research shows that about 85% of existing tech, you know, can help us to kind of get to our decarbonization targets, the net zero targets that are out there. But I would rather focus on the technologies organizations, you know, need and help to kind of on the journey to scope 3. So first of all, I mean, technology can, help to create a scope-free baseline, as we already kind of, highlighted, and identify your highest emitting suppliers. But then once you've kind of identified that, technology will also be able to help you set kind of a scope-free target, and understanding what is realistic and how that aligns, to kind of the science-based, targets out there. Then if we then look at the procurement process, you can break that down into upstream and downstream. So for upstream, adjustments are necessary in kind of your category management technology to allow you to find kind of low carbon alternatives, or even more importantly, getting access, to this. For example, many companies are looking for kind of recycled paper, recycled plastics, and there's really a shortage of recycled content in many markets. So through upgrading market intelligence in your category management suite, you can get access to this information, but also discovering kind of new technologies and suppliers that are needed in order to drive changes in your scope-free emissions. Then think about sourcing, right? So in your kind of sourcing technology, it's about having a library, having the right questions that you can put in place for suppliers across your categories, but also more generically, and assigning importance to sustainability in your tender evaluation and in your sourcing process. Then from a contracting point of view, you need to have a library or technology set up that allows you to contract with clauses, with automated contracting, that facilitates behavior or the right behavior from your suppliers. And then very important around supplier relationship management is to really create this 360-degree supplier intelligence that will give you the perspective of all angles of that supplier, whether it's on environment or whether it's on other elements, that will allow you to see how your suppliers are progressing towards their targets. It will allow you to see what are the emissions that your suppliers have. So really creating full intelligence around that, but also being able to share that across a wider network. So there's not too many repetitive tasks because suppliers are also keen to kind of keep it simple, and we'll touch upon that also later. And then further kind of downstream in the procurement process, you need to be able to offer your end users, the people that actually buy things in your organization, the ability to choose for a low carbon alternative. So how can they choose one product or one service over another service, and being informed about what is the impact of their choice when it comes to the environment and the scope-free emissions. So I think in these ways, I mean, just some examples of how organizations can use technologies to help reduce scope-free emissions.
Great, thank you. Maria, have you got any examples of best use of technology, or generally how can technology help organizations to reduce their scope 3 emissions?
Yes, I'm happy to share some examples on the fantastic overview that Jill just shared. So I can come and pick some examples of the type of technologies that he just mentioned. For example, for building our inventory of gases in scope 3, technology was an enabler of this. So our procurement transaction platforms, our transport analytics centers, the access to this data, it was the key success factor to have our scope 3, all the inventory and very comprehensive model, and this was the basis for us to start moving from disclosing to managing, setting targets and setting now roadmaps to decarbonize, for example, transportation. Another example of technology following the transportation case, as I said before, 95% of the fleet is not owned by us. However, we engage our suppliers, our transportation companies, and every truck, or I cannot say every, but about 70% of the trucks are having in-vehicle monitoring system. So this telematic technology that we are monitoring every kilometer they drive to deliver our products. And this information is centralized in our transport analytics center. And from there I can capture and I can estimate for every vehicle what is a specific CO2 in absolute or in intensity for associated with our downstream transportation. Another example of technology, more on the energy transition, is specific on the tracks, the technologies that we are monitoring and partnering with our OEM suppliers to engage on this fleet replacement, not only for our fleet, that is a small number, but also from our transportation companies. So we are really mobilizing to accelerate the need of these electric heavy duty vehicles in the market. And with this, we are in the different markets that we are present. For example, in Latin America, what we did is like we launched a project where we invite the OEMs. They will explain in each country what type of trucks, what type of technology, if it's an electric or an hydrogen, and by when it will be available in the market. And then we are mobilizing our suppliers on this access to technology to decarbonize their fleet. So technology and innovation in every step, as Jill mentioned, is really an enabler of any action that you want to drive to decarbonize your Scope 3.
Brilliant, thank you, Maria. Gladys, do you have any examples to share? Perhaps you could sort of tell us a bit about how technology has enabled cost savings.
Thank you, Jennifer. Of course, as my peers were saying, technology plays a key role in Scope 3 and Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. I would like to cover a different perspective. I will be more focused on internal, meaning in the technology that we use in our manufacturing process, could be in our own facilities, or we can instruct also how to do it in our vendors' facilities as well. What I have been finding very useful, there are many players out there, or maybe you have someone inside your company that they are very expert on the equipment and technology that you are using for your particular processes. Then in reality, you really need to deep dive on all the step-by-step in your manufacturing process and assess. Maybe you have underutilized capacity, you have maybe some conveyors there or over there like continuously running, or you have leakages somewhere, or maybe a very old technology and new technology is available that will be save you some CO2 emissions and so on. Then this analysis, what I have seen is that they provide you a very comprehensive analysis on exactly the emissions that you are provoking from your manufacturing process, and also recommendations on what is out there in the market, or what you need to do, maybe just decrease some capacity or put in some sensors to really turn on and turn off as needed some of your conveyors that are continuously running, for putting just a very simple example. And then based on my experience, at least looking at projects with different suppliers, is you may think, oh, but this is an additional investment or a cost for your manufacturing process. And at least in all the cases that I have seen so far, it of course depends on the industry, but in my case, in consumer goods, it's between 1 or 7 years, the return on the investment, because you are upgrading your technology. And even though the ultimate goal is the reduction of the CO2 emissions, you have collateral positive impacts in terms of cost reduction or waste or efficiency, even for your productivity in the organization. Then this is just another perspective from the technology in terms of the manufacturing usage.
Thank you, Gladys. Thanks very much, everyone. We're just going to have a look at our poll results for a minute, because our audience have given us their votes. So the poll question was, do you think your company is making good progress towards its Scope 3 emissions goals? Now, 57% of you have said yes, so over half think you're making good progress towards your Scope 3 emissions goals. 23% have said no, so nearly a quarter, over a fifth of you. And 20%, so around a fifth of you, don't know. Can I ask our panel, what do you think? Is this what you expected, Yile?
I'm a bit surprised. I mean, to be honest, 57%, with all the new pledges and things going, and I would expect it maybe a little bit more. I guess there's a difference between progress and commitment, or from pledge to action. But there's clearly a lot of work to do, and that is not so strange because this is a hugely challenging area. From all the perspectives that we already mentioned. The don't know response is also interesting, because that's probably where we'll need to focus on and understand why that would be the case. Is there no target? Is there no commitment? And as a result, is maybe even progress not shared across these companies? So very interesting results.
Yeah, on that point, that first point you made about progress versus making a start, someone has in our audience has actually stated they clicked no, but they are very aware and have made a start. So perhaps a few of you also did that, that you have made a start, but in terms of progress, you don't think necessarily making good progress. So maybe it's that moving things along rather than actually starting at all. Okay, Gladys, what do you think?
Yes, I'm not surprised. Unfortunately, in different forums in the last 3 to 4 months, I have getting the same responses. I would say between 50 and 55% is like they feel like they are having progress. Unfortunately, having like 45% or 50% in the ballpark that I don't know, or I don't feel that we're making progress, that of course is alarming. And my invitation to the audience is, in reality, we need this to be like 100%. There is no kind of alternative. The planet needed. And then step out as a leader in your organization. We are all leaders, whatever the role that we are playing, and keep pushing for making these numbers moving away. And one way to keep pushing is that you are showing up here today. Then to really understand the need, what others are doing, you are getting some insights that you can bring to your organization, and please don't discourage, just keep pushing and the right move.
Thanks, Gladys. Maria, any final thoughts there? Anything to add?
I'm happy to see the answers. I'm a bit surprised. I mean, the question was progress to our goals. Scope 3 is the most immature protocol from the greenhouse gases. Setting goals, setting the inventory of gases is a pretty complex exercise, and from there to set your goals, it takes time, at least from our experience. And then when you have this solid starting, you can start claiming the progress to our goals. But I'm very happy to see that seems that it's moving, and yeah.
Great, okay. So Scope 3 emissions account for at least 80% of a company's total emissions. How can we best engage highest emitting suppliers in reporting their Scope 1 and 2 emissions and coming along the journey to net zero? Gladys, I'd like to come to you first on that one.
Yes, I think in everything related to CO2 emissions, in reality, we really need to focus on collaboration with the whole ecosystem and really partner with all of them. Then I have a very strong background on quality and quality management practice, and I have been applying those on terms of compliance from our own facilities as well as suppliers. Then you may call it in your organizations design thinking, maybe in other organizations they call it Kaizen events or just simple as workshops. But what I have been finding very helpful in many means is really putting together in a room the key partners. You may decide to block them by commodity, let's say all the packaging commodities together. Then we are embracing together the goal and the challenges. We are sharing best practices. We are innovating together, and we are helping everyone in the ecosystem, because here is not the rule of the game is not any longer like competition. The rule of the game, especially on planet, is collaboration, even with competition or among suppliers that are competing for the business in your organization and so on. Then through these events, what we do, just to give you a glance, is, for example, let's put the example of packaging. Okay, what we can do to reduce the packaging footprint, especially on consumer goods, is highly utilize packaging for every single product. How can we reduce the number of trips between the suppliers and our organization? Then should be better organized our deliveries. And of course, if we reduce the packaging, indirectly we are reducing costs, we are reducing waste, we are reducing materials, CO2 emissions, and so on. Or find creative ways in which maybe for some other raw materials that you are using in your company, for example, an internal movement or any other commodity, let's say metal components or screws, for example, that they are coming with packaging, then can we use like recyclable package, like going back and forth, and instead of using packaging, that of course the production of the packaging, the shipping of the package to your supplier to pack your items, all of that is CO2, the transportation and everything else. Then it creates a sense of collective energy to really make things happen. Then my message here is find a way that you truly collaborate and make all the partners in the ecosystem to talk to each other and innovate together. And that's going to be my recommendation.
Thank you, Gladys. Maria, what do you think there?
Yes, also agree with Gladys. Collaboration is key. Identify your key suppliers, work with them, access to technology for this, engaging them in reporting their emissions, or measuring and reporting their emissions. I would say most of the big companies are reporting the emissions in one way or another. Now, for my scope 3, what I need is the specific emission from the product I'm buying. And now we are talking about the environmental product declaration. And this is a big story. So engaging them is also working with them, understanding. For example, we have a meeting with one of our supplier of mobile equipment of the quarries, the yellow machines, the big ones. They are the main source of diesel consumption in the quarries. And we were very happy because they say we have the environmental product declaration for all these models. So then we had a meeting with them, and they explained with our expert of we have also in-house life cycle assessment expert, to understand how they are accounting for the emissions of their product that we are buying, and how can we incorporate this in our disclosure of the scope 3 or in our sourcing strategy to keep buying what type of products to reduce our emissions. So it's a collaboration, as Gladys said, but again, technology, as we talked at the beginning, to facilitate this challenging work of capturing the emissions and declaring the emission of the product that you are buying. The other way around, we sell, for example, a special type of concrete, a material for building, and we also offer to our customers this environmental product declaration that you will see for this eco pack type of concrete. Is the brand name. You will know how much CO2 you are putting in your construction site, because we have this environmental product declaration. So our scope 1 and 2, we can tell our customers how much they are capturing from buying our products. It is a challenge because it is the calculation and the reporting of the CO2. You have liabilities, there is a lot of greenwash around the world, and so we need to be precise, and there is a scientific approach, but technology is helping and scaling up these EPDs from the different sectors.
Great, thank you, Maria. Yile, what do you think?
Yes, and I mean, what I've noticed in my work, and not all companies are as advanced as my fellow panelists. It also starts, you need to identify, of course, which suppliers you're going to target, first. And I think that's already a problem for many. If you look at your 10,000, 50,000 suppliers, where do I start? And one of the examples that I always use is one that we worked with one of our clients, is to look at 3 dimensions, because at the end of the day, you want to target suppliers that are willing, you want to target suppliers that make an impact, and you want suppliers that have, well, at least to start with, an understanding of what what is needed. So segmenting your suppliers in terms of kind of combining your strategic and key suppliers on one hand, on the other hand, your kind of top emitting suppliers, because they are not always the same, obviously. And then thirdly, combining it, what I would call the low-hanging fruits, suppliers that have already set, for instance, science-based targets. You get this circle in the middle with a group of suppliers that I would suggest tackling first, because they are the ones that are willing, because they've signed up to targets. They have an impact because they're part of your top emitting suppliers, and there's an understanding, or there's the willingness, right? Because they are your strategic and key suppliers. Then of course you need to take supplier action, and oftentimes we think about this in a very big way, but it also starts with very simple things, right? Just simply cascading your climate actions and your targets to your suppliers, to making sure that they are informed about what you think is important as or being as a customer of your company. Obviously there's a lot of push, and we see a lot of companies helping their supply base get certified on science-based targets, or to achieve kind of high CDP climate scores, and I would certainly continue to encourage that. But it would also be collaborating across the industry, right? And collaboration is a big word, and to offer kind of learning resources. So how can you share some of the data? How can you help your suppliers kind of progress? And then finally, there also need to be kind of incentives, right? So think about creating sustainability awards for your suppliers, very pragmatic way as part of your supplier day. It's another angle to look at. What about sharing sustainability newsletters about what your company is doing, the progress that you're making, and how you're encouraging your supply base to do that. But also holding kind of sustainability innovation challenges to help solve key challenges, as some of the examples we already heard today, and provide a certain incentive. And then the last thing I would say you would need to do is think about your supplier relationship management framework, and how do you incentivize your suppliers to come along the journey. And there's various ways you can do that, both financial or non-financial, or rewarding progress, or versus penalizing penalizing bad performance. But think about different payment terms that you can offer to your suppliers, because that may be allowed to free up cash flow to invest in solar technology in their plans, or other decarbonization. Could you give them a bigger share of wallet with that supplier? Could you do joint investments, or longer term contracts with a supplier? So also rethinking your supplier relationship management framework is essential, I think, for making this work.
Great. Thanks, Jire. Some lovely examples there. Incentivize your suppliers. Brilliant. So we've talked a lot about collaboration. How can we best create common cause with buyers and suppliers? I mean, few ideas there already, but perhaps we can look at a bit more in detail across our supply chains to help us all achieve our sustainability aims. Has this challenge led to any innovative solutions? I mean, I think Jile's covered some good ones there, but Maria, do you have any examples?
Yes, thank you. I have a fresh example, and it's a good story that is happening. Our company is founding member of what we call the First Mover Coalitions, and this is under the World Economic Forum. And there is when we are creating a common cause across the supply chain, we are meeting there with, for example, we buyer of trucks with the producer of trucks, or we selling building products with the companies buying building products. And what we are trying is to have this common cause with targets and commitments by 2030. For example, for the tracking in this platform, we say we will buy by 2030 X percentage of our new trucks electric. And then we have the Volvos in the same platform. And then we say, Volvos, to commit my pledge, I need 200 trucks in France in this year, X in other country. So we are sharing this information and signing the demand for also mobilizing the supply. So then the Volvo, we are talking, or the OEMs, talking how we can satisfy the supply and the demand in this collaborative platform. This is a good example, and also for our building products that more and more are demanded to be low carbon. So we are also putting there our commitment on reduction of the building materials, and our customers are also committing to buy more of this type of products that we put in the market. Yeah.
Thanks, Maria. Gladys, do you have any examples to share of how you can create common cause?
Yes, continue with the great example from Maria. I will be more about how to operationalize schemes like what she has been mentioning. I think, again, going back to my previous comment about the importance of collaboration, I was talking about your ecosystem, but we need to expand the collaboration with other partners out there. And that's what I call it normally procurement consortiums, or you can call it sustainability consortiums. Then everyone has access. For example, could be a cluster, could be the cluster of automotive industry, transformation industries, the electrodomestic industries, and then looking for partnerships with those within those clusters in which you work together, and you have normally this type of associations or clusters. They have a lot of influence or impact or collaboration also with governments, and as well as institutions like education or consultant services. Then working together in terms that you can have this analysis of your commodities, and maybe you are having a very strong purchasing power in a couple of commodities that another company is maybe the lowest or the middle. And then you partner with them and maybe develop, it's like working together. You develop a portion of the suppliers in some commodities. They work on developing other set of suppliers in a way that they are ready. And maybe one of, going back to Gila, great examples of incentives, you can create like the preference list of suppliers that will be available for the different clusters or associations, because they are evolving in their scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. And then we are supporting together the supplier base to get where we need them to be, and at the same time having this incentive for all of them. Then that's one of my recommendations in how to operationalize this process.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Gladys. Yile, any final ideas from you on top of the brilliant ones you already mentioned?
Yeah, I think I would say have one more takeaway. Because there's a lot of focus, of course, on asking suppliers to come up with new ideas, but it's also important to help simplify the efforts as much as possible for the supplier, right? Because every company will have a slightly different way in collecting data from the suppliers, and if you're on the receiving end of those questionnaires, I think it can also drive you crazy, because you'll have to repurpose a lot of your information, your innovation, the way you do business in 100 different times. So I think a common platform for standardization, for asking certain things, whether it's aligned to CDP or GRI or some of the other bodies out there, I think would be very useful, because suppliers, of course, also need to invest time in helping drive that. and then making use of these platforms where resources can be shared across the supply chain. Those are very very helpful too. And then in terms of kind of innovative solutions, I mean, there's definitely a number of great examples. A couple that always spring to mind for me is like a life science a company who actively worked with their supply chain to identify, okay, where do I have my highest scope 3 emissions? And it turned out it was in the area of blood plasma, which they purchased. And that in turn, came from, cattle, because the blood plasma came from, cattle. So they were working actively in the supply chain to see, how can we reduce, the carbon emissions or the greenhouse gas emissions related, to the cattle. And they looked at ways of kind of changing the diet and infusing, seaweed. And at the end, that resulted in a very significant reduction in their, scope 3 emissions. And that's for me a great example of how companies are really looking deep into their supply chain and then finding out where the emissions are, and then finding solutions to reduce that. Another one, I mean, I think many of us have heard about the Energize program, which is a collaboration between 10 global pharmaceutical companies to engage hundreds of suppliers in climate action and decarbonization of their pharmaceutical value chain. This program was supported by Schneider Electric, so helping drive power purchase agreements far into the supply chain and making it available to suppliers. So those are just two examples that come to my mind as innovative and really helpful in driving scope 3 reductions.
Amazing. Thank you, Ile. Yes, some very interesting solutions there. Thank you for sharing those. Well, thank you everyone for sharing your insights. It's been really great to hear your experiences and thoughts and also your ideas. Let's move on to the Q&A now, because we've had quite a lot of questions come in from the audience already. So one of them is, what recommendations and investments are governments doing to encourage private companies to invest in carbon emissions reduction projects? Maria, can we come to you for that one first?
Yes, I can share some experience from our investments on carbon reduction projects. One technology we are piloting is the carbon capture. So as you know, the cement sector is a hard to abate sector, not only because our process is energy intensive process, but also the raw material we use when change the chemical composition release CO2. So then one technology that we are piloting is this carbon capture. And in here, what we see in some countries, the governments are also partnering with us and with other companies, because it's capturing and utilization will be the ideal scenario. And here is the governments in some of our countries partnering on these big projects. These are a very expensive technology, and as I say, the magnitude to scale up and to capture million tons of CO2, I see there an interest of the governments and an active participation in this type of projects. Another example for is, as I say, the transportation. What is happening in Europe with the EU Green Deal and the ambitions to move out from road the volumes to waterways or rail, or to change the fleet. What we experienced, for example, last year in Germany was in a period of time an incentive. The government was offering some money to incentivize changing your fleet. You could apply for this cash, a part of the cash to use to change your diesel truck to a more clean technology. So this is happening more and more in mature markets or highly regulated markets when they have these ambitions on decarbonization. Government and through the public procurement also, they are taking a very active role to incentivize private companies to play this game, no?
Thanks, Maria. We've had quite a lot of questions come through, so I'm just going to go to another question. We've had quite a few questions on measurement, how to measure scope 3 emissions accurately. Some are general. One in particular is about advice or experience that you might have in measuring scope 3 emissions in least developed and developing countries. So who would like to comment on that in terms of how to measure? Yile, would you like to start us off there and see if Gladys and Maria would like to add anything?
I can certainly do that. I mean, in least or not so developed countries, I think if you think about the greenhouse gas protocol, and if we focus in on, purchase goods and services, but also, capital equipment, there are a number of methodologies available. And especially, if you think about the more least or underdeveloped areas, then, always start with your spend-based, model, or an economic input-output model, which, creates less reliance, on your suppliers. It's probably not as accurate as some of the other methodologies that are available, but it's certainly a good, place to start. And then from there, you can work your way down to the other methodologies, whether it's kind of a volume-based, methodology or a supplier-specific methodology. And by then, and also by educating your suppliers that this is important to you, they can also start to disclose, let's say, more data, which will allow you to get a better, more accurate, way of reporting your scope 3. But in short, I would definitely recommend to start with, spend-based, and then, working your way down to the other methodologies. And this can be highly automated, through technology and systems that are available out there.
Thanks, Yile. Gladys?
Yes, Jennifer, just a quick comment. I have been hearing a lot of concerns normally in this type of panels about the preciseness about measuring the scope 3. As Gila was saying, there are many different tools out there. If you really need help, get that help. But I will say don't hook on that or paralysis for analysis. Just get a baseline, and at least you have a bulk number of where are your highest impact, and do what I was saying at the beginning of the panel, your supplier matrix, in which you are looking for a high volume, high impact, and at least start moving the needle on that area. Things are evolving really fast. You will be learning through the process, maybe finding new ways, but start acting. That's my main message on this. Don't get hooked on, oh, this is not the right way, or this is not the way to go. Just have something and start moving around.
Thank you, Gladys. Just moving on to the next question. Is it possible to get up-to-date emissions factors, as most of the ones openly available are very out of date, such as DEFRA 2011 or GHG protocol in USA in 2016? Yile, do you have any information on that?
I mean, it is sometimes difficult to get an update from the national databases. Absolutely agree. But there are many companies out there that have done over thousands of LCAs, life cycle analysis, that they keep in a database that you can access for a fee. So it's just a matter of searching for those companies, getting access to those databases, and then start using more up-to-date emission factors.
Thanks, Yile. Maria, do you have any other information, or does that cover it?
Exactly like Gilles say, what we use is environmental databases. We use a combination, as he mentioned, the spend base with Exio base to input-output modeling for the non-material categories. And as Gladys say, the focus on the top categories, the most intense on volumes on type of CO2. We use these environmental databases that are in the market for a fee, much more precise and updated than some statistics. Yeah.
Great, thank you for that. Now, this is an interesting question that's come through. It might be a challenge for you to answer this. So what is the number one thing stopping procurement teams from making a meaningful impact on their carbon emissions? What is actually preventing them, if
the cost? Coming back to the magnitude. So we bought a fantastic full electric vehicles in Switzerland with no return of investment. So I can do a super sample to test the technology, but to really make the impact, you need to scale up. So I say it has to be competitive. And then this is the mission of procurement, the mission of suppliers to understand what is in stake. In many cases, the cost will come hand on hand, like with the increase of the fuels. Now it makes more sense to change from the traditional fuels to alternative fuels because it's cheaper, or with the disruption in the paper industry, if you are having packaging based on paper and the price is going up, and the scarcity of the resource is also increasing. So the price is the main driven of a sustainable sourcing decision. You can pilot technology, you can test, but if you cannot scale up, it's also not a solution. So I think for procurement professionals, we have a super opportunity to challenge this sustainable competitiveness, like my CPO said. Yeah.
Gladys, what do you think? Thanks.
Yeah, I do agree 100% with Maria that cost will be a challenge. But I would say maybe secondary is also sometimes you may say, okay, I don't care about cost, but there are no alternatives available. Like what else I can use in a specific country that I want to use, I don't know, electrical transportation, but it's not available at all at this moment. Then you are stuck. You really want to do a contribution. You maybe want to pay the surcharge and you are doing other cost reduction projects somewhere else, but the alternative is not there. That I think that's another big challenge and is frustrated.
Thank you, Gladys. Now, this other question is, when setting the boundaries for Scope 3 emissions, how far upstream is best practice? Should this go all the way up to raw material mines? Or what do you think? Or what do you do? Yile, what do you think there?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And there's a lot of debate about this. I mean, yes, I mean, well, I wouldn't call it best practice, but the best you can do is to go, all the way back to source. But is that the most, practical and way you can do it? I think you have to test this. You have to do it for a number of suppliers, and especially your core suppliers. I would definitely do supply chain mapping exercise to exactly see, where, raw materials products are coming from and how you can make, specific interventions in that supply chain with help of your supplier, to optimize, Scope 3. Now, if you then look at completely something else that is maybe not so much of a priority, maybe an indirect, then I would not go as far as that for now, unless you are very advanced in your journey. Then you can probably do that. But again, it's really about getting the right impact. And there's always going to be a cost-benefit analysis, attached to it. So for, key products, your highest emitting sources of Scope 3, definitely have to do that. For some of the others, I would not. I would probably stop or tier 1, tier 2. Yeah.
If I can complement, at least for a company like us with 100,000 suppliers, your levers are with your tier 2 to your tier 1 suppliers. So the things that I buy, but my understanding of the full life cycle of what I'm buying. So then you engage and you work with your tier 1 suppliers, but understanding from cradle to grave of the product that you buy. And then you involve the tier 2, tier 3 by this life cycle analysis and understanding what other alternatives I can use instead of this product, other product that has less over the life CO2 emissions. So actions with tier 1, but understanding of the full supply chain, like from cradle to grave.
Great, thank you. And just, we're almost out of time. We did have one question specifically for Maria. See if you are able to answer it. As you mentioned, your trucking is almost 100% third party. Did you install the data collection technology for them to get the data to your transport analytics center?
Exactly. Each of them, a majority of them, has this in-vehicle monitoring system, and we are capturing online all the movement, the harsh brake, harsh acceleration, speeding, kilometers driven, and this is part of our analytics and our intelligence to optimize the dispatch and make our transportation more efficient. That is one of the levers. It's not just the technology of the truck, but also optimizing the dispatch and the driving are the levers to reduce diesel consumption. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Maria, and thank you to all our wonderful panelists for taking part in this discussion. It's been really, really interesting to hear your ideas and innovations, and I'm afraid that is all that we have time for today. Thank you to everyone in our audience for tuning in as well. Thank you to GEP for partnering with us on this webinar. The recording is going to be available shortly, so you can come back and watch it on demand in case you missed anything or you want to go back to any of those great ideas. Well, have a good rest of your day and goodbye for now.
Thank you. Bye.